Thanks for joining me, everyone. Rukshan here, and just doing a short little discussion in relation to Shane Patton and his recent appearance at a parliamentary inquiry. So the parliamentary inquiry was around the pandemic response in Victoria. And for anyone that doesn't know Shane Patton, he is the Chief Commissioner of Police in Victoria. So there was a member of the Liberal Democrats, David Limbrick, who asked him some very interesting questions around policing in Victoria, human rights, and also what appears to be, and what I would probably say is, a double standard of policing when it comes to the way that Victoria Police interacts with different groups of protesters. So in terms of the answers that were given by Shane Patton, look, I'm not the least bit surprised after what I've seen in the last few months and how Victoria Police operate. It really did come across as just another, greasy politician covering up for policies and covering up for decisions that they've made without any bit of self-reflection or just kind of any bit of critical evaluation of maybe some things that they can improve on or what went wrong. There was none of that. It was more so just like, hey, we did what we had to do, and maybe people don't like it, but that's just how it is. And we were well within our rights to treat people the way that we treated them. And on the question of human rights, people like Shane Patton, this school of thought is coming into Australia as well, where it's human rights is like a collective thing, so it doesn't apply to the individual anymore.
And so when you talk about human rights, I want to talk about the human rights of the community in general and everyone else who's doing the right things. So we absolutely consider human rights in our enforcement. We did on that day.
This is a very new phenomenon, because before all this pandemic stuff started, a lot of the people on the left would be like, no, human rights is a very individual thing. It applies to everyone regardless. It's you can't abuse the human rights of one single person, because that's a crime against all of humanity. But what we have today is this kind of collective thing where it's like, yeah, we can trample on these human rights. Okay, that's fine, because we're helping the collective human right. And they're trying very hard to sell this, and I think that's what kind of Shane Patton was doing by saying, Victoria Police takes human rights very seriously. I'm a member of this group of human rights things, and they give Victoria Police advice, and everything we do is centered around human rights. Come on, that's just a load of crap.
I actually chair a Human Rights Strategic Advisory Committee that's made up of quite eminent persons in this state who provide advice to Victoria Police.
Shane Patton is like, yeah, we treated these people in a bad way to protect the rest of the community. So yes, we probably did trample on their human rights. He didn't say this directly, but I'm just inferring this, that yeah, we did, do this certain thing to this group of people, but we had to do that to protect the rest of the community, yeah? And I've heard this kind of rhetoric from people who, during a civil war, for instance, they will bomb a town, and in that town they might kill some, like a certain ethnic group, civilians, people that had no relation to the war, and the government will come out and be like, yeah, we had to do it for the collective good. That's just, that's how it is. We didn't abuse any human rights. It was just part of the thing, and we had to do it because, that's what we had to do. And this is kind of the response that we're getting from governments and unfortunately also the police, who are more so open to being like, yeah, we did all those things, and that's just how it is, deal with it. And then when it came to the question around the protests, so the Black Lives Matter protests in June and the lockdown protests in November, I think that was, we've heard this kind of answer before, but it was really interesting to kind of hear it. Shane Patton articulate on it a little bit more, where he brought it all down to the emotional toll that the death of George Floyd was taking on people around the world, and Victoria Police, in a part of their work is to sit down and watch television and watch the news stories from around the world and see how people are reacting overseas, and be like, oh well, we better not let that happen here. And that's kind of how they craft their response. And because of all the emotional toll that was happening overseas, they decided, oh, we don't want to get involved in that stuff here. Let's just let the protest happen. So Black Lives Matter protest, 10,000 people marched down the streets of Melbourne. when we were just coming out of like that initial lockdown period when things were kind of almost going back to normal. You had 10,000 people, and there were still restrictions and rules in place then. But Victoria Police and the government, I would say the government more so, turned a blind eye to it, which allowed the police to kind of really not enforce it at all. So in terms of, if we were to look at what happened during that protest, there were even instances where Victoria Police were kneeling down to protesters. So there was this kind of acceptance of this protest, and Shane Patton framed it around emotion. And then he also further went to say that people overseas were looting, burning, burning cities to the ground, and he saw that and he thought, oh, we can't let that happen in Victoria, we can't let that happen in Melbourne. So it was a very heroic thing that the police had to do to save the city from these people that were going to protest and burn the city of Melbourne down. And it's just crazy because it shows this interesting, I guess I wouldn't say it's like racism as such, but there's this tendency from people like Shane Patton to group people in this country, whether it's the people of the First Nations or people of colour, and then group them with other people in America, people of colour in America, or the Black Lives Matter group in America, and say, yeah, all these groups are just, they're violent. And if we don't let them do what they want to do, they're going to burn the city down. So, because we know that these groups are violent, and we know that these groups act in certain ways, and we know these communities are violent, we're going to have to let this protest happen out of fear. Now, again, I think Shane Patton's just talking crap. So what obviously happened during the Black Lives Matter thing was the government pretty much capitulated, and like any other lot of woke leftist governments around the world, just let it happen in their towns, and it kind of benefited their overall Marxist socialist agenda, so they weren't too worried about it.
Reluctantly allow that Black Lives Matter to go ahead because of the emotion that was in the community, because of the emotion that was being displayed across the world, and because of what we'd seen in other communities across the world. We'd seen arson, we'd seen looting, we'd seen assaults, we'd seen cities, and I'm sure everyone here has seen the reporting on the news that were damaged and continue to this day still suffer the impact economically and from a reputational point of view. So my major concern at that time, as a Deputy Commissioner then, we said this should not occur.
No, he's passing judgment here on people as well. If you pay attention to what he's saying, it's crazy because we don't have a history in Victoria of people burning the city down and rioting because of their grievances with the police. There's no history of that. So obviously the belief that someone like Shane Patton or Victoria Police, very intelligent people, sitting down and watching TV in America and saying, oh, this happens in America a lot. And in America, there's precedent, right? It happens all the time when there's an incident like this. Looking at that as a member of, the higher up command in Victoria Police and saying, oh, that's going to happen in Melbourne, and, we're just going to let the protest happen, and this is the excuse that we're going to use later on, it's just ludicrous. And no one's buying it. Anyone that kind of can critically evaluate what's being said here should not fall into the games that Shane Patton is playing with his words. And then, the way they treated the lockdown protesters, did Shane Patton watch the TV about lockdown protests in Italy and in other parts of Europe where they were being violent and, burning the city and doing those things? Is that why he was stopping the protests from happening, the lockdown protests? Is that why he stopped them from happening, or did he let them happen just in case, Like what's that play here? And then what about the protests? Did Shane Patton watch the protests that were happening in Europe in relation to the lockdown? In relation, like for instance, in Italy, I think there was some violent protests and a bit of looting and arson during some of the protests and clashes with the police. Did he think, oh, we better let the lockdown protesters go ahead because they'll get violent and burn the city down? No. So clearly there is a double standard of policing by Victoria Police. And the reason for it is more so to do with politics than anything else. And someone like Shane Patton just doesn't have the gumption to get up there and say the truth, that, he's just a pawn of the government and whatever he's told to do, he'll do. And after the fact, they can come up with all these nice narratives, but that doesn't really change the fact of how the community actually sees what happened in those instances. In terms of policing in general, I was always of the view that the police were, members of the community, and their primary responsibility was to the community. Now, a lot of people can say that I've been naive for most of my life, and that's probably the case, because I actually think that as well. Because today I see the police very differently. When I see the police interacting with someone today, the first thought that comes to my mind is not that that person that the police is talking to has done something wrong. They most likely have. But the first thought that crosses my mind is, what's the police doing wrong in this interaction? What rules are they breaking? Are they giving this person, treating them in the correct manner? Are they overstepping their bounds? These are the things that are going through my mind now, and I'm just a normal member of the community, and I suspect that a lot more people are looking at the police this way today. There is this kind of great mistrust that's been built up in the community, and Shane Patton just getting up there and firing off some lines there to protect all the things that they've done over the past few months without any kind of critical evaluation really doesn't do anything to rebuild these bridges which have been burnt with the community overall. So look, there's just my general thoughts on what I thought about Shane Patton's performance. I think clearly someone like him might be naive enough to think that these things are going to just go away, but I think it's an ongoing thing, and I think a lot of people will be discussing this for a long time going forward, and that's a good thing. And I think it's good to keep the pressure on them, and eventually people like Shane Patton, Luke Cornelius, our good friend Luke, batshit crazy Luke, will have to eventually one day really answer to the public for their involvement in all this nonsense, which is mostly, I think, being orchestrated by Daniel Andrews. Thanks for watching, guys.